I want to talk about the Nikon D5200 and the Canon T5i, or 700D as it's known in the rest of the world. These are kind of your two entry-level DSLR cameras from your big manufacturers right now. I have videos up about the D5200 versus the T4i, and honestly there's not a whole lot different, but people aren't really searching for that anymore because the T4i has been discontinued. It's the T5i now, so we want to look at, even though not much has changed, let's talk about these two cameras and how they match up with one another. Now, what I like to do is I'm going to talk about what the T5i does or has or offers over the D5200. Then I'll talk about what the D5200 offers, and then maybe offer some summary advice. I'm going to follow this video up with future videos that really show you video quality on automatic and manual modes. I'll show you low light images and video, and of course just some sample images. Again, very, very similar, the T5i and T4i. So if you're dying for those and I haven't got them up by the time you're watching this, I'll have links down below that show the image quality between those two cameras, which is basically the same, and video quality. And I'll touch on that now because even though I don't have all the samples up, I have seen the differences between these two. So the big feature, or one of the big features and differences between the T5i and the D5200 is here on the back. This articulated 3-inch screen is a touch-sensitive screen. And now this was introduced with the T4i, and it was something that I honestly thought I wasn't very excited about having a touch screen on a DSLR. I kind of poo-pooed the idea, but I have to say I've really come to love it. It's a very nice, very responsive screen, similar to what you got on your iPhones or other smartphones. It's not a dumb touch screen. It really makes using the camera a breeze. We haven't lost any physical buttons. All of those are still there, and I appreciate those because when I'm looking through the viewfinder, it's nice to be able to use those physical buttons. But having that touch screen there is nice, and it also makes focus points really, really easy to achieve. You in live view, if you're taking a picture, especially macros or other things, you can touch where you want the focus to be, and you can touch to then zoom in very quickly. It works nicely. On the D5200, you use the little directional pad on the back to achieve your focus points when you're in live view, and it can be a little arduous to scroll it across the screen. It takes a little bit of time. It's not a huge difference, but it certainly is a difference. I also get a lot of questions about accidentally operating the touchscreen when you bring it up to your face, maybe hitting it with your nose. I've never done that. There's one single button in the top right corner of the touchscreen that you have to touch to activate it. I've never accidentally touched that and then suddenly changed settings on the camera. So that is one difference. Another big difference is that the Canon is being sold with two different STM lenses. You can buy it with the 18-55 STM or the 18-135 STM. The STM means this kind of silent, smooth autofocus during video. On the Nikon side, this lens isn't terribly noisy, but during video, if it's focusing, the microphone certainly picks it up, and it doesn't focus as smoothly and as nicely as the STM lenses do on Canon. If you put a non-STM lens on here, then all bets are off. It is much noisier, much slower. So it's only with those STM lenses. If you're trying to figure out which STM lens is better for you and you're leaning towards the Canon, I have a video up that compares those two lenses. Both of them are very, very nice lenses. And that brings me to another big difference between these two, and that is that the lens the Nikon comes with, the 18-55, it also is sold with an 18-105, but the 18-55 isn't a great lens. It's not a bad lens, but it doesn't let the sensor in here shine. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Another difference is wireless flash control. This little pop-up flash here on the T5i can optically fire other external flashes. That's pretty nice for some studio work if you think you're going to go that route, or if you're looking for a camera to use in the studio and fire external flashes. You have that feature built in. The Nikon D5200 does not. Another difference is the live view. I mentioned this a second ago about focusing, but the live view does a really nice job of exposure simulation. You can change your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture and see the effects of those in real time on the back. Now, there's a slight caveat there. Changing your aperture does change your depth of field. You don't get to see that change of depth and field unless you press this tiny little depth of field preview button over here. But you do see the differences in the amount of light that the sensor is going to capture, meaning if you close the aperture down, the image is going to get darker. It's really nice for learning. It's immediate feedback, even more immediate than taking the picture. Just before you take the picture, as you change these settings, you see them change. The D5200 allows you to change your ISO and your shutter speed, and you do see the exposure simulation on the back if you've enabled it in the manual movie settings. A little strange that it is tied to manual movie settings, but it is. You cannot change your aperture during during live view with the D5200. You have to turn live view off, change your aperture, come back into it. So that is a difference. It's I don't want to make too much of a big deal about it, but it is one of the reasons that I really like the Canon for beginners. It's really easy to learn with because all of those features are just enabled by default for you, whereas you got to do a little bit of work, and aperture is always blocked off from being able to change it. You can shoot in various aspect ratios with the T5i if you're using live view. Again, that's tied to live view, so you need to make sure you're using live view, but you can shoot 3:2, which is the default, 4:3, 16:9, and even your Instagram 1:1. You'll see that blocked out on the back. The D5200, you can only get into those aspect ratios if you crop in the retouch menu after the fact, so that's an important difference. The ergonomics of these two cameras are very similar. The T5i gives you just a little bit more room in the back here to rest your thumb, a little bit larger hands, it's nice. But the D5200 is fine. It's just your fingers, if you have larger hands, are going to end up resting across some of these buttons up here on the top. But otherwise, they feel quite similar in the hand. The grip may be a little bit shallower on the D5200. That's not a negative or a bad thing. That's just a difference. The T5i has a inbuilt focus motor, and so you can throw pretty much any modern Canon lens on here and it will focus just fine. The D5200, and this is true of the D3200 as well, does not have an inbuilt focus motor. There are some lenses that it will not autofocus with. Now, that used to be a really big deal back in the days of the D5000, D5100. Nikon has since released more lenses, more primes mostly, that do have focus motors built into them. It's less of a big deal, but you may run into that as an issue for you. All right, let's talk a little bit about what the D5200 offers that the T5i does not. First is number of megapixels. We got 24 megapixels in this D5200 versus 18 in the T5i. It's not maybe as big as it sounds when you spread those megapixels out around the edge of the image, because they are spread out on all four sides. It is a fairly slight difference, but you can get more detail, and it is a better sensor in here, and you really do see that in low light if you're shooting with a lens other than this 18 to 55. You compare these two images side by side at 100% with both of these lenses on, and the Canon often looks a little bit sharper to me until you switch to a different lens. And then when you switch to a different lens, you see that you see the more megapixels, you see the more detail, and in lower light you see less noise. And you see a little bit more of a dynamic range. It's a little bit more separation between your brights and your darks in that. The D5200 also has 39 focus points versus 11 focus points on the T5i. That sounds like a big difference. In my real world tests, it really doesn't amount to a whole lot of difference. And in fact, one of the downsides of having more megapixels in this camera is that it does seem to be a little bit slower in processing those, and a little bit slower, not necessarily to focus, but to get going sometimes in taking pictures. I was doing some action shots of skateboarders a few weeks ago, and the D5200 would hesitate just a little bit from time to time, causing me to miss shots. I really didn't see that with the T5i. In both of those cases, I was using just the center focus point. I wasn't using all of the other ones out around. One of the things that the Nikon offers that I really like is that it has a small light here for low light focusing assist. It's just a small flashlight that turns on when it's trying to focus in low light. The T5i shares with the T4i. It pops the flash up and does kind of an annoying strobe when it's trying to get focus. That can be confusing to you folks you're taking a picture of, because they see the flash go off. They assume the picture has just been taken, and maybe they'll start to move away or look away when really it's just trying to get focus. Also, another thing that I've noticed is this is one of the places where I see a real big difference. Nikon has really nailed the onboard flash exposure. I've been really happy with pictures that I've taken when this flash has popped up. The T5i, T4i, they're often a little bit overexposed. There are workarounds. You can adjust your flash exposure, but the default settings out of the box, definitely the D5200 is a better camera in those kind of situations. So if you're going to be taking lots of pictures with an onboard flash, you may want to consider the D5200. On the video side, the Nikon offers 1080p at 60i. Now, there's real filmmakers aren't so excited about 60i. That's the interlaced. You get a lot of jaggies in there, but it does offer it. You're limited here to 30 frames per second at 1080p. And the video in general, out of the Nikon and the Canon, default settings out of the box, I kind of prefer the look of the Canon, but as the light levels drop, and if you know what you're doing and you're really willing to work at it, the Nikon does produce some stunning video at lower light levels. Really, really nice stuff. If you do a little bit of post-processing to it, it can look even more gorgeous. And it does offer the uncompressed HDMI out. If you're an indie filmmaker, that is pretty significant. If you're just a parent trying to capture pictures of your kids, it's not such, or video of your kids, it's not such a big deal, but that is a nice feature for a camera in this price point on the Nikon side. The Nikon also offers some additional scene modes and effects that you don't find on the Canon side. One of the ones I feel like it's a little gimmicky, but I get asked about it often, is the selective color. That's where you can take a picture of a rose bush, say I want only the rose to be red and all of the rest of the image is black and white, or grayscale would be more technical. It's got that. It's got some other scene modes, and it has a built-in HDR mode that is more robust than the Canon. The Canon's is pretty weak. It has it, but it's pretty weak. You have several options over the settings here, and it does a nice job of those. The D5200 also has an accessory. This is maybe a little unfair to compare these two because it's not sold with it, but it's a little wireless dongle that allows you to do live streaming to a phone or tablet and to download pictures from the camera. It's only about 60 bucks. It's pretty nifty. It works. The app is very limited, but you know, it does work. The T5i, you don't really have any options that are made by Canon, but you can, of course, insert an iFi card as the SD card, and that allows you to beam your pictures to any smartphone device or Wi-Fi hotspot, including a computer, but it doesn't give you that live view streaming. There are other ways, other expensive ways to do live view streaming, but none of them for 60 bucks that the Nikon is offered with. There's, in addition, there's the built-in intervalometer in the D5200. You got to have something extra to do that. That's for time lapses. It's fairly simple, and you're limited to 999 pictures, which may sound like a lot, but if you're actually doing a decent time lapse, 999 pictures can go by fairly quickly. But again, it's nice that it's kind of just built right in there. The retouch menu in the D5200 is very robust, a lot of options. It's much more simplistic in the T5i side of things. And the one last thing that I want to say the D5200 has that the T5i doesn't is a few quirks. There is the aperture one that I mentioned of switching, not being able to switch aperture when you are in live view. I've also noticed sometimes that moving in and out of live view, your aperture will suddenly change when it shouldn't, even if you're in manual settings. There is the kind of general slowness. If you're in live view, a lot of these are connected to live view, these quirks. If you're shooting in live view, there can be a really surprisingly long delay in reviewing your images, and in general the processor hasn't quite seemed to keep up with the sensor. So they got a nice sensor, it's producing these beautiful 24 megapixel images, but it's just a little bit slow. Frames per second wise, once they both get going, they're very, very similar, but the reviewing and the kind of general operation of the camera is a little bit slow. I think the interface isn't quite as friendly as the T5i. It's definitely not terrible, and they give you this nice programmable function button right here that by default allows you to control your ISO levels, but you can change that to be your automatic bracketing images or your exposure. So you have a lot of customizability with just that one single button there, and you don't really have that as much on the Canon side. So which should you buy? The D5200 or the T5i? Well, it really depends on the kind of photographer you are and the kind of photography you do. Now, I've been talking about the T5i here with the 18-55, but it is also sold with the 18-135. Both of these lenses are really nice, a step up from the older kit lenses and a step up from the Nikon kit lenses. If you're a parent, or just kind of your vacationer or random photographer, you're looking for something convenient that's going to allow you to get good photos and video in a variety of conditions, the T5i with the 18-55 or the even better, the 18-135 is a really nice combination. At beginner, you're nervous about moving up to a DSLR, the interface, the touchscreen, they're all really nice on the T5i side of things. If you are looking for the absolute best performance and you're willing to quickly spend money on something other than the kit lens, a prime lens or the Sigma 17-70 I've reviewed, or an indie filmmaker and you're really going to be shooting with just primes, they're really hard to beat the D5200's quality, especially with its video. It produces lovely, lovely video. But you need to be ready to kind of work at getting it there. Out of the box, it's not quite as easy to operate and film with, but as I said, it does a really nice job. I just kind of lumped two groups of people together. Really, the good news is you can't go wrong with either of these cameras. Both of them are capable of producing very lovely images. If you have any questions about which is right for you, you can leave a comment down below, or even better, come over on the Facebook. Right below this video is a link. Leave me a message there. I check and answer those messages more often than I get to the YouTube comments. And I'm happy to hear how you photograph. Please don't say, which one should I buy? Because people do that to me. They say, which one should I buy? That's all they say. I can't tell you which one you should buy if you don't tell me anything about you. Tell me what you've been shooting with, what you'd like to shoot with, or what you want to shoot, and how serious you are about photography. I'm happy to hear that and give you my recommendation. If you have any questions or you want to leave comments about something I didn't touch on or cover, there are other little features here and there, but I think I did a pretty good job of covering both of these cameras' highlights. Just leave a comment down below, or again, come over and find me on Facebook. Please subscribe too. I'm going to have more how-to videos coming for both of these cameras. If you have topics you'd like to see covered or questions you want answered other than which one you should buy, again, just leave a comment down below. And I thank so much for watching.